Okay, we're going to do a quick introduction to collage making. Collage is basically papers, photographs, drawings, or whatnot that you have cut and then glued together. And it's important to note that the collages that we're going to be working on are not just random elements that you're gluing onto a paper. You're going to be thinking about the construction and the composition process of it, using the elements of art like line, shape, value, form, color, texture, space, and principles of design like emphasis, balance, contrast, and unity. Some things to consider. Why would it be important to do collage work? Why not just draw it or paint it? And there are a variety of ways to look at this. One reason I like to use collage in my own artwork is I like the hard edges that I get from a cut line, which are harder to get with paint, but also in some cases by arranging elements that I have found rather than trying to come up with all of the elements and pieces on my own. I come up with things that are spontaneous that I probably couldn't have conceived ever on my own. That's one reason I like to use collage in my work. You're going to be doing either a surrealism collage or a collage on a social issue. Surrealism is a vocabulary word for you. You should know what it means. There's a famous artist that you probably have at least heard of. His name is Salvador Dali, and he is closely associated with surrealism. He did the melting clocks. Surrealism as an art form or as a genre of visual art has to do with imagery that seems very odd or dreamlike. However, even if objects are different than what you would see in normal life, there is still some sense of cohesion to them. So here's an example of a surrealist collage, cut paper elements. Even though the pieces may seem random at first, like birds inside of a house and they're different sizes, you can see that there is a common motif here, common theme throughout it, and in a strange way, it does feel like something you might see like in a dream. Notice also that the paper isn't randomly glued down. The paper's been cut carefully to create a very specific image. Those birds look like they're occupying that back room, and that's based off of how the paper was cut. There's curtains in the foreground. There's a clear background, middle ground, and foreground. Even the hair on the model in the foreground is made from a bird's nest, so we see this common motif here. When you do collage, it's very important that you start with your background and then layer on top until you get to your foreground. It's much, much more difficult if you start with your subject matter, like the person in the front here, and then try to make a background behind them. Cutting out pieces and fitting them around a person to make it look like it's behind them is very, very difficult. So before you glue anything down, you should already have a pretty good idea as to what your structure is going to look like. And you should start with the background first and then put things on top. Here's another example. This is a very simple one, but it is effective. And you can see how putting these elements together that normally don't belong together recontextualize the image. Rather than these children just running and laughing and playing, as it appears that they're doing in the original photo, carrying these goats behind them, now it seems as though perhaps they're running from this monstrously large giant in the background. So the images that you place together may develop a new meaning based off of how you put them together. Here's an example that has elements that I like and elements that I dislike. Okay? This is a previous student work. The figure with a dress on, with the handshake head, is effective. It's been cut accurately. It's strange, but also feels like it could exist like in a dream. There's some sort of sense to it, even though it's very strange. And that's effective. However, the background does not look planned out. It feels very random. The elements at the bottom of the page also just feel slapped together. They have the color green together, which is some consistency, but this doesn't really feel like a consistent, believable space. It has potential, but it didn't meet that potential. I think this piece is simple but pretty effective. Clearly they started with a background, and with their mountain ranges they stacked those in front, clearly not from the same photograph, several different mountain ranges. What I think is most effective about this page, one, is that it is eerily understandable, even though it's strange. It feels very suffocating, so it's effective in that regard. I like to imagine what these people were doing in the original photograph. Perhaps that gentleman was reading a newspaper. Perhaps one of these other people was dancing with somebody. But when the figures were cut out, they were cut out carefully, and they were positioned in such a way that they feel like they're occupying the space. See, they're not just slapped on the front of the mountains. It's very easy to see that their arm, the arm closest to the viewer, is overlapping the mountain and is in front of it, whereas the face of these individuals has been tucked behind the mountainscape, so that those figures are both in front of and behind the object that they're interacting with. That gives the sense of 3D form. It's very effective. Once I did a collage example, and I used a toy figure, a Ninja Turtle, and a toy car. And rather than having the Ninja Turtle stand in front of the car or behind the car, I positioned it such that one leg was in front and one leg was behind, and then it looked like the Ninja Turtle was riding the car. So how you place your imagery and how you stack your imagery will also make a very big difference in what your image looks like and how it's viewed by the people looking at it. If you didn't want to do a collage on surrealism, it was too strange for you, you could choose a social issue. Okay. Some examples of social issues that you probably are aware of is like environmentalism. Okay. Taking care of the environment is a social issue. It affects lots of people, and also not just people, but other creatures and plant life. You could do something on another social issue such as civil rights. You could address racism. You could address economic inequality or poverty. You can see here that this person has done a collage addressing some social issues. What I like about this collage is that it is a combination of found imagery that have been placed down, and that found imagery is now used as the canvas. They have then painted over the top of the found pictures rather than using a blank piece of paper. You also have this option. You can use oil pastel, you can use drawings, you can use photographs, and a combination of all of those things. If you're going to use watercolor, do not watercolor on magazine paper. It will just destroy it. Same with newspaper. It will just destroy it. However, you could watercolor on watercolor paper and cut that out. And once it's dry, paste it together with your other imagery. You can also use other mixed media, chalk pastel or oil pastel. Mixed media is a-okay for this assignment. Here are some more collages addressing social issues. Waste not, want not, I'll never use it again anyways. The brain on a platter. This is clearly addressing old stereotypes of gender roles, which are archaic and frankly not true, right? Particularly about ideals with women and what their role in society was presumed to be at one point. We know that these stereotypes are wrong, and society at large has shifted away from that and allows people to be who they want to be without assigning particular roles to them. But anyways, that's what this one is addressing. Here's another one that's kind of effective. This one is more surrealist, in that there's a map in the background, a child playing with a toy, but also photographs of a real real boat. It's effective in that it tells some sort of narrative and seems to make some sense together. I love this example. I love this example so much. It's very cubist in style, and we're going to address that in just a minute. It feels so lively. It feels so jazzy. Notice that the colors and the patterns and the vivid nature of it is synonymous with the music that it seems to be portraying here, with the trumpet and the drums and the stand-up bass. Notice also that this artist, when making this image, didn't just find pictures of people and post them down. They were constructed. They were constructed from lots of different pieces. And that's a real strength in this. In some cases, it's more effective to not have something look photorealistic, but to construct it instead. This is another beautiful, beautiful collage. Notice the color palette here. It's a rather muted color palette. Notice how many different images were used, and they've been sliced and spliced together in unexpected ways. Take a minute to just think about why you would ever want to cut and paste paper rather than just drawing. When I was in high school, I used to frequently vocalize my disdain for the artist Pablo Picasso. I thought, why is this person so famous? Clearly they can't draw. Clearly they can't paint. They don't know what things look like. Why? And my high school art teacher at the time showed me how ignorant I was and introduced a whole new way of looking at art for me, because I really didn't like Picasso's art when I was in high school. Mostly because I thought Picasso didn't know how to paint or draw realistically, and that's why he made everything look triangular. What I didn't realize, and it took my art teacher to tell me this, was that Pablo Picasso could paint very, very realistically. In fact, he could do so from a very young age. He studied art and art making from the time he was young. By the time he was 14, he could paint in a style like what you're seeing here, extremely realistically. It wasn't until later in his career that he moved into what would be known as the Cubism. And so then the question became, if he could paint realistically and draw realistically, then why? Why would he do this other way of doing art? And that opened up a whole new world to me. I started studying his paintings like Guernica and learning about the context behind it, like the Spanish War, and looking at the elements that were involved and feeling the emotion that these jagged images brought out that can't be brought out by a photorealistic image. I learned that there was a place for that, and that sometimes it's more effective than realistic drawing and painting. Beautiful, beautiful collage work. You need to use some of the elements of art and principles of design. Emphasis is what we use to draw attention. And how you arrange things like line, shape, value, color, texture, form, and space will determine what people pay attention to in your artwork. One way to get attention is with color, right? That's why traffic cones are bright orange. Color is an easy way to get people's attention. It's used in advertisement all the time. Another way to get attention is by changing the size of an object so that it's not its typical size, whether that's larger or smaller. And another way to get attention and to use emphasis is in the placement of those objects. This image here uses color and space effectively to draw attention. And when you use them in combination, they can be very, very effective. This piece to the right would be an example of surrealism. So you need to either create a collage based off of social issues or a collage based on surrealism. You should start by doing maybe just some thumbnail sketches, some very tiny, simple drawings that give you an idea of the sort of image that you're trying to put together so you know what kind of imagery to look for. We'll talk about this more in the next video, but you can also create objects rather than find objects. Here's a few more examples of collage that are used effectively. You can review those in the PowerPoint.